Catherine, thank you so much for coming today and for talking with me. I have a few questions that I'd like to ask you. The first one is this: what is it that made you fall in love with the theater, and more specifically with the voice work for which you're so well known?
That's a rather personal question. Well, in my case at least, I fell in love with theatre and then much, much later, really, with voice work um, because I needed it. I grew up as a very alone child. I had lots of freedom, space to run around in the Himalayas. I was born in India. And then later at a boarding school in England, which had a huge plot of land. So I roamed for hours alone through woods and fields. And then in Ireland, where I lived as a child, where there was sea and mountains and rivers and fields and animals, and not a lot of human interaction. So when I got finally to be in a play, I think I'd been in a play when I was about 3. But then later, when I got to actually play Toad in Toad of Toad Hall at school, I found that I got a human reaction and a human response. And then I had some wonderful training at my high school, and I began to figure out the puzzle of communication. Then I got sent to Central School of Speech and Drama, and then when I went back to teach there, I was asked to teach voice, verse speaking, and prose reading, and I loved all of those things. I was a text specialist, really, but voice came easily to me, so that I actually didn't remember what we had done in class, and I had to reinvent the wheel. And I discovered I could make changes and help people express themselves. That's enough to fall in love with something, is that you make a difference, that somebody has grown up or changed or developed or found a new creative outlet. So yes, I did fall in love with it, very much so. Still am in love with it.
Also, who are some of the most particularly profound influences on your work and career?
Well, the person who started it all was my teacher in high school. Her name was Barbara Bunch. I don't think she ever wrote a book, so maybe you don't even know her name nowadays. But she was also Cicely Berry's teacher. She taught us both 10 years apart in different schools, but she was an incredibly gifted, sensitive and supportive teacher. She had been to Central, she was an alumna, and she sent me there. And then when I went back to teach at Central, I had met a man who introduced me to the work of Wilhelm Reich. And this man, David Kotzebue, I later married, had 2 children with him, who have also influenced me very much. So David and his work with Wilhelm Reich influenced me enormously. That work has really become the central innovation of my work and what differentiates it from more classical work. My origin is very classical, and that still is in the work, but the Reichian work, which the tremor work that I do is part of, has been enormously influential. Then there was yoga and a bunch of other healing modalities like shiatsu. I went to healing school for 6 years, so I'm very interested in energy. I've learned various meditations. I've learned all kinds of different touch and movement works, and put them all into this job, as I said in my previous speech, into making language work. Then beyond that, those who have influenced the work are the people that have taught. In challenging me or working with me, collaborating with me, accepting what I did or not accepting what I did, they've created influence which has moved then into the next time I taught. So it has always been growing and changing. Nothing is in stone. That's why it's taken me years and years and years to want to write a book about what the work actually is, but that is now currently in process. So both my teachers and my students and my friends and my husband, they've all influenced me very much.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your own work? How in your work do voice and breath relate to healing and meaning and play?
Healing, meaning, and play. Well, of course, they all interrelate. But in terms of thinking about healing, I've worked with very many damaged voices and found that the tremor work and retraining the breathing has very often taken the stress and the effort off the throat area and the vocal folds particularly themselves. So that, yes, the work that I did has a strong relationship with healing. And I got very interested in energy work as well as touch work. So if you think of a damaged voice or an ill-ish person, learning through breathing and expressing themselves to come back to normal, I think the same thing can happen when you move from normal to brilliant and creative. So that's the play part. It's the same direction, is to grow and change and develop and become better, whether you're starting damaged and becoming more normal, or whether you're starting normal and becoming more creative. That's healing and that is play. Meaning, well, as I said earlier, I'm interested in making language, written language, work when it is spoken. You bring the present moment into it as you breathe life into it. And I came up with this phrase when I was teaching and coaching and acting at the American Conservatory Theatre in the 1970s, late 70s. And I came up with this phrase, think, breathe, speak, because actors very often didn't think, they just repeated words, they didn't breathe, they just repeated words without taking a breath, being inspired. So I wanted them to slow down and mean what they said. So after think, breathe, speak, I came up with the phrase, breathing is meaning. And I said, when I write a book, that's what it's going to be called. But actually, I only wrote a 5-page article, which is named that. And the book has had to wait many, many decades since then. But it's on the way. Look for it.
And as a final question, given the past year, year and a half that we've had, what do you want most to say to artists and students of theater in our current moment?
Well, artists in the current moment, especially voice artists and people who believe, like I did as a Luddite, in presence and the power of the vibration of the human voice, rather even than it being mic'd on stage. We're now having to deal with video, so there is no actual presence. But it's been an enormously challenging, like all of my life, time to figure out the puzzle of how to teach voice online. And what I and my teachers have discovered is that it actually is possible. And that sometimes when the camera focuses on something very small, which you might miss when you're teaching a group, it's been fascinating. So I think my advice to artists at this time is don't be a Luddite. I have been a Luddite all my life. And accept the challenges that the enormous population growth and the pandemic and the digitalization of art, all of that brings, and go with it, play. Find a way to play with it. Have fun.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Dassia, this was enormously interesting and helpful and fun. Thank you, and I'm really truly honored and very, very grateful to you and to your team and to all of ATHA. Bye, everybody.